This began with a classified ad. One line in a local Austrian paper. Maid wanted. Oberalzberg. She was 17. Curious. Desperate for work. What she didn't know, what no one told her, was that the job would lead her through 3 SS checkpoints and into Adolf Hitler's private stronghold.
We always hoped that we would survive, that we would be saved.
For decades, she buried what she saw. The whispers, the disappearances, the trembling hands of a dictator unraveling behind gold-framed windows. Now, with the world almost forgetting, she's decided to speak.
They built a mysterious weapons room in Oberalzberg.
Not to rewrite history, but to correct it. This is what Elizabeth Kalhammer witnessed behind the walls of Berghof. The job that changed everything. In 1943, Elizabeth Kalhammer was just a girl looking for work. She wasn't thinking about politics or war. Her country, Austria, was already swallowed into Nazi Germany. Life was hard. Jobs were scarce. So when she saw the newspaper ad, simple, vague, Maid wanted, confidential household, Oberalzberg, she didn't hesitate. She applied. Days later, she stood at the edge of something she didn't understand. Uniformed guards scanned her papers. They said nothing, only gesturing for her to move forward. She passed through one checkpoint, then another. Snow dusted the ground. The mountains loomed. And then she saw it. Burghof, a grand estate perched on a ridge of the Bavarian Alps, breathtaking and quiet. It looked like a postcard, frozen in elegance, untouched by war. Elizabeth had no idea she was walking into Adolf Hitler's private residence. No one said his name. Not yet. But everything around her whispered it. The soldiers didn't smile. The staff barely spoke. Orders were precise. Movements rehearsed. The silence said more than words ever could. Her job seemed simple: cleaning, serving meals, and keeping her head down. But Berghof wasn't just a house. It was a stage, a nerve center, a place where history's darkest conversations took place behind closed doors while the help poured tea. Within days, she understood. This was not domestic work. This was survival. She couldn't look Hitler in the eye. She couldn't ask where the other maid went when she didn't show up. No one explained. No one questioned. You didn't need to, because the message was clear. You're lucky to be here, but luck can run out. Elizabeth Kalhammer had entered a world wrapped in luxury and locked in fear. The mountains around her were silent, but inside Berghof, history was mutating, quietly and at close range. Rules, fear, and disappearances. The rules at Berghof were never written down, but everyone knew them. Speak only when spoken to. Never look directly at the Führer. Never question an order. And most important of all, never talk about what you saw. Not inside, not outside, not ever. Elizabeth didn't ask why the other girl's bed was suddenly empty one morning. She didn't ask why the head cook had been replaced overnight. She didn't ask who decided these things or what happened to those who made mistakes, because no one asked. You learned quickly that curiosity was dangerous. The silence was sharp. Conversations ended the moment a superior entered the room. Eyes dropped. Smiles vanished. The staff moved like they were walking on glass. Every day began with the same quiet fear. Will I still be here tomorrow? One of the senior maids pulled Elizabeth aside early on. Her voice was flat. Don't speak of what you hear, not even in your sleep. The warning wasn't meant to scare her. It was meant to save her. And so she learned to fade into the background, like furniture, like wallpaper. She dusted the shelves where books filled with hateful ideas rested. She wiped down tables where genocide was quietly planned. And when the men in uniforms passed through the halls, she looked away and held her breath. But it wasn't just the presence of power that haunted her. It was the absence, the unexplained empty spaces where someone had been only yesterday, the missing faces, the unasked questions. At Berghof, fear wasn't loud. It didn't shout or slam doors. It whispered. It waited, and it was always there, just beyond the chandeliers and the polished floors. This wasn't work. This was survival. Hitler's fortress of control. Berghof was beautiful. That's what made it worse. From the outside, it looked like a mountain retreat built for peace. Clean white walls, grand windows that opened onto snow-covered peaks, velvet furniture lit by soft golden lamps. But behind the symmetry was a system of suffocating control. Everything in that house, every clock, curtain, and spoon served one man's obsession with power. Elizabeth quickly understood she wasn't living in a residence. She was trapped inside a machine, a perfectly tuned illusion that masked something far more sinister. No one entered Hitler's study. No one touched the meeting room doors. Even the routes the staff took were tightly controlled. High-ranking officers, Goering, Himmler, and Goebbels, came and went without warning, bringing with them an air that made the walls seem to contract. Their presence was heavy, their footsteps were quiet, but always noticed. Orders weren't shouted. They drifted through closed doors and tight-lipped messengers. Elizabeth and the others didn't know what decisions were being made, but they felt them. Each time the generals visited, the tension rose. Each time a staff member disappeared, it reminded everyone how close the danger was. Hitler himself rarely appeared, but when he did, the atmosphere changed completely. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence was enough. His shadow entering a hallway was like the sudden drop in pressure before a storm, and that's how it worked. Control didn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looked calm. It looked like a quiet breakfast where no one dared drop a fork. It looked like politeness enforced by fear. Inside Berghof, power wasn't declared. It was arranged, flawlessly, constantly, and without mercy. Elizabeth wasn't just polishing silver. She was witnessing the choreography of tyranny, designed to keep everyone in their place, even if they didn't yet know what that place was. The man behind the myth. Elizabeth never spoke to Adolf Hitler. Most maids didn't. And yet, she saw him more clearly than most historians ever could. He was not the giant portrayed in propaganda posters, not the genius orator waving to crowds. He was a man who drifted through his fortress like a shadow, unpredictable, strange, and sinking deeper into something no one dared name. One moment he was calm, passing through a hallway with a soft nod. Next, he'd erupt over a misplaced napkin. Rage didn't build. It struck like lightning. The staff called it the shift, a coldness that settled over the house when he was near. His daily rituals bordered on obsession. Every meal was vegetarian, prepared under watchful eyes, and tasted first by young women chosen to test for poison. The water had to be lukewarm. The dishes were arranged just so. But even with all this control, he broke his own rules. Elizabeth remembered him sneaking into the kitchen after midnight, looking for Führer cake, an apple nut dessert left out just for him. The most feared man in Europe, tiptoeing like a child toward a treat. There were stranger things still: his trembling hands, his erratic mood swings, his long silences. Dr. Theodor Morell, his physician, injected him with a cocktail of pills and potions every day. Over 70 substances, barbiturates, stimulants, opiates, even cocaine-laced drops for his eyes. The drugs dulled him, then lit him up, then broke him again. Elizabeth could see the cracks forming. Hitler no longer seemed like a man in control of anything. He was pacing in a cage of his design, restless, medicated, and afraid of ghosts only he could see. What she saw was not a leader. It was a man unraveling behind closed doors, held together by fear, habit, and pharmaceuticals. Now first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you. Eva Braun, soft power, silent threat. To the world outside, Eva Braun was barely a footnote. She appeared in no speeches, signed no documents, and rarely stood beside Hitler in public. But inside Burghof, Elizabeth Kalhammer saw something very different. Eva wasn't a shadow. She was the quiet center of everything. The staff greeted her with "Heil, milady," as if she were royalty. She acted like the lady of the house because she was. Without wearing a uniform, without issuing commands, she controlled more than people realized. She picked the maids' uniforms. She assigned their rooms. She decided which tables needed polishing and who should serve at dinner. And every December, she handed out Christmas gifts to the girls, sometimes skeins of wool, urging them to knit socks for soldiers on the front lines. She smiled, chatted, and asked about their families. To someone like Elizabeth, it was easy to mistake her warmth for kindness. But kindness wasn't her goal. Eva watched everything, and everything she saw made its way back to Hitler. She knew how to read a room. When Hitler's moods grew dangerous, she stepped in, not to shield the staff, but to keep him contained. She knew what words calmed him. She knew when to leave and when to listen. Elizabeth quickly learned, Eva Braun was not a victim of Hitler's world. She chose to be part of it. She benefited from it. The silk gowns she wore, the jewelry she flaunted, many of them came from Jewish families who never returned. She lived in comfort while others disappeared by the thousands. She didn't give orders, but she heard them. She didn't light the fire, but she stood beside it silently. To the world, Eva Braun was invisible. But inside Berghof, Elizabeth saw her, not just as a partner to power, but as a part of it. Why Elizabeth stayed silent? For decades, Elizabeth Kalhammer said nothing, not a word to her neighbors, not even to her family. The years she spent inside Hitler's private estate became a locked room in her memory, sealed off and never entered. At first it was fear. Fear was planted deep the moment she arrived. "Speak and you'll vanish," they had warned. And she believed them because she'd seen it happen. The maids who asked questions, cooks who spoke too freely. They were there one day and gone the next. Even after the war ended, the fear didn't leave. It lived in her body like a shadow. People didn't understand what it meant to be there. To serve tea just steps away from a man planning genocide. To be polite to officers who could kill you with a glance. How do you explain that? Later, it became shameful, not guilty, she hadn't committed any crimes, but shame for being so close to them, for surviving it, for saying nothing. She told herself, "I was just a maid." But deep down, she knew that wasn't the whole truth. And then, near her 100th birthday, something shifted. She realized silence had protected her, but it had also buried something important. The truth. The real version of what happened behind those mountain walls. "Before I die," she said, "I must speak." And finally she did. The final days of Berghof. By early 1945, Berghof was coming undone. The once orderly estate where even napkins were folded to perfection now felt like a crumbling stage. The war was closing in, and inside the mountain retreat, panic replaced precision. Elizabeth felt it first in the silence. Fewer cars arrived. The grand Nazi officials stopped visiting. No more midnight film screenings or drawn-out strategy meetings. Hitler barely showed his face. When he did, his back was hunched, his voice slower, his hands visibly trembling. He no longer gave orders like a man in control. He barked at them like someone trying to hold together a world unraveling. Even Eva Braun looked uneasy. The calm she once carried became nervous pacing. Staff whispered in corridors, their voices hollow with dread. Then came April 25th. Elizabeth was sweeping the great hall when the ground began to rumble. At first it sounded distant. Then the alarms shrieked. Planes, dozens of them, American and British bombers. The mountains shook as fire tore through the sky. Explosions cracked through walls. Windows burst. Statues toppled. Berghof, once the most carefully guarded residence in Nazi Germany, was torn apart in a matter of minutes. Elizabeth didn't wait. She ran into the forest, heart pounding, smoke at her back. When she looked back, the empire she had served silently, fearfully, was in flames. That was the last time she saw Berghof. The legacy of a witness. Elizabeth Kalhammer never saw herself as important. Not a hero, not even a survivor, just a girl who had once mopped floors in a house of monsters. But now her voice has become something more, a thread that ties personal memory to historical truth. Her account didn't come from books. It came from long, sleepless nights, from faces that disappeared, from the sound of aircraft over the Alps and the sting of knowing she had been close to evil and stayed silent. She didn't speak to accuse. She spoke to remember. And in doing so, she gave us what documents never could: atmosphere, the tremble in Hitler's hand, the smile Eva Braun used to mask control, the way silence crawled through the halls like a second presence. Elizabeth didn't interpret what she saw. She didn't try to explain it. She simply told it, and that in the end is her legacy. Not just as a maid, not as a name in an article, but as a witness to how power hides, how fear rules, and how even the most ordinary person can carry the weight of history without ever meaning to. Elizabeth Kalhammer didn't change history, she illuminated it. For nearly a century, she carried the burden of what she'd seen behind closed doors, moments no archive recorded, truths no official dared admit. And when she finally spoke, she didn't do it for attention. She did it because silence can only hold so much. Her memories now belong to all of us, a final human fragment of a world built on fear and fiction. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the clearest truth, and when they speak, finally, we listen. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story that history tried to forget.